And I think that's it. We are live. Well, welcome back, everybody, to In Liberty and Health. This is episode number 213. Very, very excited for this conversation because I've been thinking about her a little bit ever since she kind of got back to me and said we should do another show. So, obviously, make sure you go check out the show sponsors. We got Tiger Fitness right there and LMNT, as well as Fox & Sons Coffee. All those links are down in the description below. So, I guess without further ado, let's get into it. What is up, everybody? My name is Kyle Matovcik. I am the host of the In Liberty and Health podcast, where we talk all things liberty, health, and wellness, and beyond. My hope is to encourage and spread the message of liberty and physical and mental well-being. I hope you enjoy all the topics we talk about with our guests. We're on all major streaming platforms, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Man, I'm doing as good as anyone can do getting buried by his 13-year-old son on leg day.
I'm not going to apologize for not being on this podcast because I got to go see Metallica. So if that's a problem, kiss my ass. Okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Hi, Cynthia. How are you?
I'm good, Kyle. Yourself?
Oh, absolutely fantastic. And as I said in our little introduction there, I'm very, very excited to sit down and have a conversation with you. You were a little tardy, unfortunately, because you spilled branched chain amino acids powders, which, for me, that is, devastating. I would be on the floor crying and trying to get every last little drop of that stuff.
Oh, no. As soon as it's on the floor, it's done for me. I know people have, that 5-10 second rule. I'm like, nope. Not, especially with how California is nope, we're not doing that.
Oh my God, awful. Was it at least one of your lesser preferred flavors, or was it the flavor?
Lesser preferred, we're good. But
okay.
Yeah.
That's good. I have a peach ring flavor from MTS Nutrition, and if I spelled that, I'd have to kill somebody. There's just no other way around it.
No, I know the feel, especially when you purchase things, especially on the subscription basis, you are ready to go. Because usually by the time the new order comes in, obviously the month prior, you're at, it's wit's end, right? You're getting scraps and leftovers at that point. And so I get it. It hurts a lot. I was in my feels earlier as I was rushing.
Yeah, I got you. All right, so I guess before we start rolling, other than our branched chain amino acids, give everybody a little introduction just in case they missed our first show together.
Sure. So first of all, thank you again, Kyle, for having me on. I had such a great time being with you last time because obviously we had to talk about politics. We had to talk about all that good stuff going on with our government, but I also was able to branch out and talk about, and share things about myself that a lot of people might not know. So I had such a great time just talking about a lot of things that, in my opinion, are a lot more important than politics and that I hope people remember and have perspective on. But a little bit of background about myself. I am based here in San Diego, California. I am the Young Republicans president and chairwoman. So the Young Republicans have multiple countywide organizations and chapters. And then there's each state has their own statewide Young Republican chapter, and then we have the Young Republican National Organization, similar to how the organization goes for, how we have the Republican National Committee, like the RNC, and then each state has their own statewide organization. So there is an organization such as that for the Young Republicans. So I run the San Diego Young Republicans countywide chapter and organization. And so a little bit about myself and why I get along with Kyle so well is I used to be a registered libertarian, so I'm not a lifelong Republican. So I'm not someone that grew up being political, although I've always had very traditional and conservative values and beliefs, but I never always connect my political perspectives with my beliefs and my values because I didn't grow up that way and didn't necessarily talk about it. And then when you go to public school in California and when you go to public university, I went to UC San Diego, obviously, and if you're someone that's apolitical, there's, a whole bunch of adventures there and, just wasn't necessarily that piqued my interest. It wasn't until the 2016 federal election with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, where it was such an exciting time to be a student where I, caught the political bug. And then from there, after the 2020 election, I got activated and wanted to be the change I wish to see in the Republican Party and in my community. And then, if anyone knows, the second you step into local activism, it never ends. And so I have been very blessed and privileged because of the relationships I've built and then the doors that they've opened, that I've in the position where I am today, where I'm the president, the chairwoman of San Diego Young Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, that's an awesome and very, very inspiring story. And not a lot of people, especially in, I don't want to say that we're necessarily in separate spheres here, but, everyone's going to say, oh, you're a white guy with a podcast, right? And of course, you're a libertarian. But people like you and a friend of mine, Brandon Harnish, who's a city councilman over in Indiana, the work that you guys do really does go completely just under the radar and underappreciated, because it's like, I can't imagine dealing with meetings constantly. I mean, I was a little active in the Libertarian Party there for a little bit, but then I kind of stepped away just because I determined there were better uses of my time. Once again, doing this, spend time with my wife, and my job just very, very busy. So unfortunately, I couldn't continue to do that. But I mean, some of that stuff is just completely mind-numbing stuff. And, it's great that we have people like yourself and like Brandon who are willing to go out there and, do the boring day-to-day stuff to make sure that kind of the political kayfabe that we see every day can continue to go on. And then obviously the good, some good can come of it. And then, hopefully good people rise through the ranks. And I think, once again, the work that you do kind of helps lay the foundation for that.
Thank you so much. No, absolutely. And I think what people don't realize, and the myth that I want to bust, is that it's such a saturated industry. But the reality is, especially on the Republican side, we're always looking for good humans. We're always looking for people that are willing to put in the hard work. But in particular, obviously, as the president of the San Diego Young Republicans, I care very deeply about providing opportunities for young Republicans and young conservatives to have a seat at the table. But you don't have to come, like I said, from a political background. I'm the only political person in my family, so I didn't come in with any connections. I didn't have anyone that, could, introduce me to so-and-so. It started with me originally, being very uncomfortable and surrounding myself in environments where I didn't know anyone. And it was very difficult because I got involved in politics after college. So I wasn't aware of Turning Point USA and PragerU and all these other really great established organizations that help connect with young conservatives that are college aged and school aged with people with similar values. And so anyone knows that when you graduate college, you have to put in a lot more effort to make friends and, more importantly, find people with similar values, especially if you want to branch out your social circle outside of your coworkers. And to full disclosure, I'm best friends with a couple of my old coworkers from one of my jobs after I graduated. But I understand, wanting to be able to have boundaries and wanting to find people, outside of where you work. And so I remember how hard and difficult it was. I remember being depressed. And so I want San Diego Young Republicans to be a space in the community. So people want to find like-minded individuals that have the same political beliefs. I mean, for far so long, we have to tell people to agree to disagree. I agree with that 100%. You don't have to agree with everything. And it doesn't have to be politics. I think it's normal to have disagreements with your family and friends, and it doesn't have to be as controversial as politics or religion or what have you. But I also understand wanting to have fellowship, wanting to find community, and wanting to have people where you all think the way that you do. It's normal. My pitch to people is, we go to church, we play sports for a reason. It's because we want to find people that have common interests like us. And so that's what my sole mission has been ever since I became the president this year of San Diego Young Republicans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like what you said there. It seems like so much of our political dialogue really does get focused around the dogma, and all you see is just people arguing back and forth, and that's really not reality, or at least not in my experience. I'm kind of blessed that I work with mostly people who, for the most part, politically align with me. They're mostly older Republicans, and obviously we align on a lot of issues, but there's some issues where we're going to disagree. But even when we disagree, it's not like we're going out back and then rolling around in the park and no, it's we have a conversation about it, and it's oh well, we disagree here, okay, well, what else? Let's move on from there. I can't stand this idea that everybody has to be an enemy, and that we have to divide our politics has to play such a big part in our lives. But like you said, at the same time, you do want some kind of companionship where, like, you know, you're going to want to talk to people who agree with you to kind of see where their mind and perspective is on certain stuff. And also, you know, just the fact that being surrounded by people who agree with you generally does feel kind of good because, you know, once again, you're around like-minded people. Like, I wouldn't want to play in a band with people who we don't share anything in common with because, you know, the music that we're going to produce probably isn't going to be any good if we can't come to an agreement on what it should sound like. And I imagine it's probably the same thing in a political party, especially a local function. Like, if you guys don't have a similar vision of where the party's supposed to go, then, you know, what are you doing?
Exactly. And I agree with you because even before 2016, I think part of the reason why I was apolitical is because I don't think politics was as exciting or cool back then. I mean, to be quite frank, growing up in school, history and, you know, learning about the Constitution and all these other, like I said, I was not a political nerd at all, right? I didn't grow up like being excited about the debates or anything. I wasn't excited to go door knock for Mitt Romney or George Bush, or like, I just was not one of those people, right? I was not excited and I didn't care, right? But then something happened in 2016, for better or for worse. A lot of people on both sides got incredibly activated, and I think in a lot of ways, I am grateful for that too, because, you know, I'm one of those people that came into politics during the Donald Trump era, right? So I'm definitely not throwing shade or anything at all, because I am where I am today because of all of these things that have happened. So I can understand that perspective too, about like all the divisiveness and whatnot, because I quite frankly don't remember that. And even nowadays too, where my moments where I want to unplug from politics, I find like even the people that aren't very political, they seem to act like they know so much about politics because they care so much or whatever. I'm just like, no, that's not how it works. You're not as educated as you think. And it also doesn't have to be this way. So I agree with you 100%. I don't quite remember what exactly happened. I do personally believe that, you know, something triggered in the 2016 election that got people more activated, for better or for worse. But on another hand too, you know, candidly speaking, like on personal levels, I like, especially if one is dating for marriage, I think it's normal. You should be dating for things outside of just you both like Star Wars or you both like to go getting food together. You should be dating and marrying for values. Like, for example, the biggest barometer, in my opinion, is how do you both want to raise your children? And I think one of those core facets is, you know, if one is political and one is not, obviously someone who is passionate about their politics and their values are connected to how they vote, that is going to impact whether you realize it or not, how you raise your children, and all of those things play into factor. And so on another hand, in some ways, like in a weird alternate reality, I guess in some ways it is like a blessing or a curse that now things are so political, but at the same time, I have found myself in a weird dichotomy because I'm one of those people that is trying to empower and inspire people to get involved in politics and at least be more aware of things. So I can see both sides because I'm one of those people that came into politics during the Donald Trump era too.
Sure. Yeah, no. And, you know, I actually really agree with that. And I hear some people say sometimes like, oh, it's fine if you have political differences or something like that. I really don't think you can date somebody who, let's say, if my wife was, and she's not, but let's say she was pro-choice, and that's probably her coming home right now. That's probably why my dog's barking. But like, if she was pro-choice and she was very pro-war, or, you know, just kind of completely 180 on a lot of the stuff that I value and that I mostly talk about, then I don't think that's just like, to me, it's a fundamental thing. Like, I think like when it comes to like a national level, if we're gonna have laws about abortion, then like a 9-week ban or like the first trimester, if you ban abortions after that point, I think you could probably get most people to agree to that. It's not a position that I would like, but I think that would be kind of like in the neighborhood of like greatest harm reduction that you could feasibly do. But like, if you fundamentally disagree with somebody that you want to be with for the rest of your life about like when life begins, that's not really a political question. This is like this is deeper than that, right? Like we're talking about when life begins, and that's kind of important, especially if you want to have kids and somebody doesn't value that specific point the same way that you do. I don't know how you can tangibly have a solid foundation for a relationship if you don't agree on something like that fundamental. At least, not for me personally.
I agree with you 100%. Even as someone as political as myself and someone that's in the bubble and whatnot, I, I don't know everything about everyone or every single issue. The reality is there are some issues that I care a lot more than other issues. And there are some issues that I am more educated about than other issues. And then there are some issues where I'm pretty agnostic about and I think are non-issues that are not hills for me to die on. And so I think part of that, when you get activated in politics, you need to be honest with yourself. And I think that's the first issue. A lot of people don't know themselves and they're not willing to get to know themselves. So that's kind of like the first step. Once you have a good grasp and a sense of purpose, and that's one of my strengths, I've always been pretty intentional and purposeful. I'm willing to do the hard work to know my strengths and my weaknesses, very introverted and very introspective and whatnot. So for me personally, that was easy, but I'm like, kind of like the exception to the rule to that. For a lot of people, it's extremely difficult to be honest with themselves and to dig deep and to get rooted into who they are and their values and their beliefs and what are their hills to die on, what's important to them. And so when it comes to, in particular, marriage, I think, one kind of barometer is, would you resent your husband or your wife for this? And if you will, then you have a problem. And that's obviously a question that you answer ideally while you're dating, so that way you don't marry them.
Right.
Because I agree with you, in particular for the abortion issue. I do think that's a huge issue that a lot of conservatives and Republicans care about. And so if you're someone that cares deeply about that issue, you need to be quite honest with yourself, and you need to be willing to bite the bullet when need be.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's not a political question at that point, because I mean, it is a very, very fundamental thing of when your understanding of, when life begins is. And like a lot of this stuff when it comes to relationships, I don't think a lot of people kind of work their way through it. And by that, I mean, like, when you're dating somebody, you're not asking the important questions. And obviously our standards and our goals in relationships are going to be completely different. Like for me, obviously I want to have a family, and it's important that my partner is loyal. For some other people, that's actually not an important thing. Like I personally cannot understand that, but for some people, they deem that to be something okay. So, my wife and I early on agreed, okay, infidelity is a deal breaker. We both want to have kids. We both, share these values in common, and this is kind of like where we want to be in this amount of time. Those are pretty simple questions to ask. I remember a coworker at one point saying like, "Oh, I can't believe you like talked to your girlfriend about having kids this early on." I think we were already dating for like 6 months or something like that. And you shouldn't like go into the first date and say, "All right, we need to figure out if we're gonna have kids." It's like there's nuance to this stuff, but like you don't want to get 3 years in and then find out like, oh, this person doesn't want kids. Okay, well, now you just pissed away 3 years of your life and you're not going to get that back. And like that's cool. You got to spend time with somebody, but once again, you should ask important questions up front, so that way if this person is going to be a viable long-term partner. I don't think there's any such thing as a soulmate. I think there's good ones, there's bad ones, and there's people who are going to work better for you or not work for you.
I agree with you, Kyle. So when it comes to, you're right, it does go deeper beyond politics. You're talking about how you view the world. Like I touched upon this similar, okay, that's great that you both like to be foodies. That's great that you both like to go get brunch. That's cool that you like the same artists. That's awesome. That's awesome. You both like to go to the beach together. That's super cool. You like the same TV shows. In reality, that is not that important. I mean, there are people that have way different personalities. Like there's people that marry introverts and extroverts and everything in between, right? So that's not what's important. What's important is your values, what's important to you, and how you want to live your life together. And if you both are on the same page in that, because you're going to be together during the worst times and the bad times. And more importantly, like it's about, if you can really trust that person, so just like basic things, like, for example, actually, I went to the fair with one of my best friends and we were just having conversations about relationships. And, we were just discussing about just a bunch of different things. But one of the points that I made, because I don't want to go into details about, what that conversation was, but one of my personal beliefs is I would not want to put my boyfriend or my husband in a situation where he is the butt of a joke, because I believe in being considerate of my spouse or my boyfriend's feelings. And similar to that, I would expect the same in return from him. I understand, making jokes at each other, or, laughing at yourself, whatever, especially if you both have inside jokes and you both know each other's quirks, whatever. But if I was in a social scenario and, I messed up or just something, or I fell short of something, I would not want my boyfriend or my husband to put me down in publicly, but especially in front of our loved ones. One, it's de-edifying. And number two, that's disrespectful.
Right.
And so that's a little bit deep, and that's kind of like a little far out, but at the same time, like, those are the things that are important. It's not necessarily about like, oh, are you on this and that issue? It's more about how you view things. So for example, the abortion issue, I agree with you. Because especially if you both are raising kids and you both are plugged into the issue, that's something that's important. Or like, for example, it doesn't have to be as polarizing that. It could be as simple as education. Where does this person stand on the family unit and schooling? If someone wants to homeschool their children, and then you have your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your husband or wife that thinks homeschooling kids are weird or whatever, that's a problem.
Right. Yeah, it's a big conflict, because I mean, even something like that, that is going to determine the way that your child sees the world, and the way that actually you may even view your child, because if you don't agree on how you're going to raise children, then it's like, okay, well, now we're kind of back to square one, because I mean, that's kind of important, how you're going to put your offspring into the world and what you want them to do and how you envision their future. Obviously, they're going to have some degree of autonomy, but this is still dependent upon the way that you raise them. Children aren't blank slates. And it was actually really interesting. I was listening to stuff this morning about testosterone, how it actually affects the baby in the womb. So like when babies are developing, I think it was like the length of their ring and pointer finger actually has something to do with the amount of testosterone they receive if they're male in the womb. So I mean, like, just down to a genetic level, men and women are going to be, or boys and girls are going to be different. So obviously, if you're okay with, let's say, your daughter being a little bit more of a tomboy, or if you're okay with your son being a little bit less of a guy's guy, and we can get into the kind of stuff that we're seeing now, that's going to be very, very important to obviously each person, because it's like, this is your kid. This stuff matters a lot.
Yeah, and I agree. And another point I forgot to touch upon earlier was, as far as being upfront about what's important to you. I mean, obviously, there's no hard line rule like, oh, you should talk about this on the first date or 3 months, whatever. Talk about when it's natural. Like, I feel like we're always in our heads. Like, if it hops up in the first date, talk about it. If it happens to be on the second or third date, talk about it. But eventually, you should talk about it. And eventually, there's going to be a natural window for it to pop up. So let's just put that out there first and foremost. But even if there wasn't that hardline rule, whatever, you should talk about things that are important to you. I mean, for goodness sake, you're getting to know each other, and naturally you're going to want to know like what's important to each other. And I agree with you. I think the earlier you find out if someone wants to have a family or not, especially if that's something that's important to you, and someday you want to have like, the white picket fence and have like cute little dumplings and, have like them crawling around under the Christmas tree with fire and like the dog in the background with the Christmas shoot or whatever. Like, if that's something that's awesome to you and something that you want, you should find out as soon as possible if that person wants that too. Like, if they want to focus more on their career, or marriage is not important to them, whatever. I'm not saying that wanting that is making you less than of a human, or that's not as important. But what's important is that you find out what's important to them, and you know what's important to you, and figuring out if those things are the same. no one is saying that one value system is less than or better than the other. It's just you both have value systems and you need to figure out if they're the same or not. And I'm a huge believer in figuring it out sooner than later. And I think politics, knowing your politics and figuring out how that correlates to how you want to live your life is very crucial and important.
Yeah. So I guess one thing that I wanted to kind of ask you about, because this has been going all over the place, and I think it's just kind of the nature of social media, unfortunately, that like this stuff about, groomers and the drag shows at the schools and stuff like that. I believe it's happening, but I believe because it's so jarring and because it really, that hits people at a level that I don't think the people doing it really understand. I don't think that's going on all that much, but like when it does happen, it's like this needs to stop, and we shouldn't be showing kids this kind of stuff. I know you're out in, oh yeah, that's right, South Dakota. I keep wanting to say California. I don't know why. I think it's because we met through somebody who lives over in California. Does it seem like the people that you interact with, like, are they seeing this, and is this happening in your community at all? Because like I haven't seen it, but you just see videos on social media, and of course they go viral instantly, and people just get absolutely outraged. But I think it's just an issue that you see on the internet because it's so outrageous.
Right. So I'll be completely honest. Like I said, I only have certain amount of hours in a day. And so, and there are some issues that I care more about others than not. And, the reality is like, even though I'm political, I try very hard to kind of unplug from things. So I might not know every single news cycle I want to. To be honest, like I tried to take a social media sabbatical like a few months ago.
Yeah.
I had to stay on Twitter because I needed to for my position that I have, right? And I had friends, because obviously I have friends in politics too, texting me new stuff. So it's almost like I need to be on social media. I have friends texting me all this, right?
Yeah.
So in particular in California, I do think there's a lot of situations that happen like that with the drag queen stuff. If it happened in San Diego, it may have like situations like that in Southern California, like it may have happened a while ago. But to be honest, because politics, like something that happens even just a week ago is old news, right? So
Yeah.
I couldn't even like recall right now for this podcast, like if something like that happened, but it definitely has happened. That I can tell you. But to my understanding, not something recently. However, that's not to say it's not happening. But It does. Those kinds of things do happen in red states too, which is why I'm a huge believer in staying and fighting for California. Because when you move to a red state, your problems aren't going to go away because there's people that move around too. And even political activism in Republican states, they exist for a reason. It's because they're trying to reform the party and make it to its image and to what people want it to be. So that's kind of like my take on that. I know I'm not spilling tea like a lot of people are anticipating, but the reality is, there's only so much that I can kind of consume and what I kind of keep tabs on. And to be honest, unless it's happening right now, today, this minute, and it's bringing my attention into a direction where I have to have a stance on it, it kind of goes over my head. If you asked me this question maybe like a year or two ago when I was in positions that I was in now, be a very different story. I might be a little bit more plugged in what the news is, but because of my day job and because of my volunteer position as the president of San Diego Young Republican, I'm not as tuned in and, into every single thing that happens every single day.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, my buddy Kevin here, he had the right comment. Yeah, that's kind of, I think what we're both kind of getting at here. Just it's reasonable for people to be upset about it because it's like, hey, these are your kids. But I think the other thing that kind of goes under the radar here is that those are parents that introduce their kids to that stuff. And I don't know what to do about that. I don't think it's right that we would go down and, beat people's doors down and, throw them in itself for the rest of their lives for doing something like that. But something should happen. Kind of pivoting on there. I know I titled this stream, Who Might Beat Biden in 2024, but I'm kind of curious your thoughts on RFK first, because this has been a very, very interesting figure to watch the rise of. So I don't know how much you've seen of him, how much you know, but I've been following him closely just because it's interesting to finally see a Democrat that isn't like the worst thing on the face of the planet. and he's very knowledgeable about the issues. He's very, very well read. And like one of my big issues is China, and he is the only presidential candidate who has any, like, he's the only guy that says like we should not go to war with China. We should recognize them as an economic competitor and win that competition. Like, that is what I'm talking about. I hear, like Trump and DeSantis. Well, Trump's like the only one who doesn't seem as gung-ho about like a full-on war with China, although he's still kind of hawkish. But RFK is really, really good. So yeah, what are your thoughts about RFK?
So I mean, I like him. I don't dislike, I think, each Democrat candidate, outside of Biden, are going to bring their new flavor. And I think it's great because it shows how much of a failure Joe Biden has been as a president. And so I think it's great to see Democrats step out into the wings and try to challenge the incumbent. I think competition makes things healthy. I have not watched or listened to that Joe Rogan podcast. However, I have been seeing that circulate on the internet, and apparently it's been very successful, and he did such a great job. So that's kind of my take on it. I mean, I couldn't dive in or give you my detailed analysis about him as a candidate, because I'll be honest, like, I'm the San Diego Young Republicans president, so I'm a little bit, my energy is going more towards figuring out things on the Republican side than on the Democrat side. I'll be honest, I love seeing the Democrats infight.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to this eventually, but the idea of Trump and DeSantis debating each other, I got to say, I have the absolute hots for that. So I guess let's kind of work our way up here. So I also have the polls pulled up here. So coming in, we're not even going to go through Hutchison, Elder, Burgum, because I don't even know who those three are. Let's start off with Ramaswamy. I actually really like Vivek, other than the fact that he's pretty goofy on China. I like his idea of like, the word nationalism gets like this real dirty tinge to it. But I think his idea of like having an American revival where you kind of have like pride in your country and pride in something greater than yourself, like specifically to your community. I think there's something really, really cool about that. So I don't know how much you've seen of Vivek or how much you know about him, or kind of like what your locale thinks of him. I have an idea of like probably what your locale is, but like I said, I kind of want to work our way from like kind of lowest up to obviously Donald Trump is the front runner.
I like Vivek. I think he has a lot of great ideas. In particular, like his books that he's authored really shows that he's a very articulate, intellectual man. And I do appreciate his candidacy because he's being able to bring forth conversations that need to be had. My biggest pushback with Republicans in particular, I mean, we just dived into a little bit. The Democrats infight all the time, and Republicans, they act like, oh, we're not supposed to fight with each other. We're allowed to have dialogue. We're allowed to have disagreements. We are allowed to be able to have a platform where we can flesh out ideas and figure out what the best solution is moving forward. This is very normal. This is what democracy and what politics is about, is trying to compromise, is trying to figure out common ground, being able to have a discourse with one another. So I feel like that's the benefit of having Vivek in the running, is him being able to kind of have a platform where he can share like his honest opinion about things. I think it's refreshing. I think it's needed. I will say one of the things that I do disagree with him on is about free speech, combating that. So I believe he got into it with Dave Rubin on Twitter about, things with DeSantis's hate speech law or whatever, and Vivek was commenting about how the way to combat hate speech is free speech. And I'll be very honest, I have a boundary with that and a disagreement with that. I definitely am not a free speech absolutist, because if free speech means you get to say or do whatever you want with my child because it's free speech, I have a problem with that. There's a reason why I want to homeschool my children. You are pressing into boundaries that need to be had. So I'm not a free speech absolutist, especially if that's what it means to die on the First Amendment. Like, no, you're not going to touch my children in that regard. So that's kind of like one of the big disagreements I have with him on, but I understand where he's coming from, because he's obviously trying to harp on Ron DeSantis, who is a front runner as well. So that's kind of like my take on it.
Okay, yeah. I guess the only area, I really wouldn't even disagree with that. I think if you were teaching somebody else's kids, then I think within that property, you're being shepherded by taxpayers. Do you kind of follow what I'm saying? So therefore, the restrictions on your speech should be kind of, I don't want to say up to a consensus, but like there are clear lines of what crosses a boundary, right?
Exactly.
I don't think you're, oh, good.
Yeah, my pushback is the boundaries that I think we touched upon earlier, which is, the sexualization of children.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable.
Yeah, like don't talk about that with my children.
Yeah, Kevin says free speech can be held for the individual, but not for the state. If you're on duty, you're acting as an agent of the state. No disagreement. I don't think you would disagree either. Like I said, if you are a teacher and you're teaching someone else's kids, then I think there's reasonable restrictions that should be placed on you. And like, we're not saying you can't teach them about complex issues, but like to be straight up teaching them about sexual things when clearly it's not at the consent of the parents, I think that's reasonable to say you shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying too. But there are people that use the free, they take advantage and they leverage the First Amendment to the fullest extent. I'm not one of those people. I draw my line there.
Sure. Coming up next, 2.3%. Ramaswamy's at 2%. Chris Christie at 2.3%. My only thing that I remember of Chris Christie was Rand Paul walking all over him in the 2016 debates, where I think he said something to the degree of, "I know you gave Obama a big hug, and if you want to give him a hug again, you go right ahead." And it was something about now I know he was saying he wanted to use the Patriot Act to go after people. And Rand Paul just tore him to shreds. So I do not have a favorable opinion of him. Curious your thoughts there.
I don't have much opinion other than for my guilty pleasure, sometimes I watch the 2016 election stuff because it was it was a time to be alive. Like the Republican primaries were amazing. I know a lot of people are divisive, but quite frankly, those debates were funny. And especially watching the Hillary and the Trump debate. So hilarious. And then when you fast forward to 2020, it's like night and day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of lost entertainment value there.
Yeah. So that's kind of like my take on Chris Christie. I mean, I don't know too much about him to really point out like certain policies I disagree with, but in my opinion, I'm pretty sure he's running because he wants to take out the front runner, which right now is Donald Trump. But I don't think he has a chance at all.
No. If the polls are anything to judge by, I don't think so. I definitely agree. At 3.8%, or no, I'm sorry. Yeah, I got that right. No, 3.6. I apologize. Tim Scott. I don't know much about him. I think I seen like a clip and he sounded good, but I mean, that was just like a very, very brief thing. I don't know anything about him. So I don't know if you have any thoughts.
I like him. I don't necessarily dislike him. I know I'm kind of coming across as like, one of those people, but I mean, I don't know if he's done anything to like really catches my eye to where I greatly dislike him at all. Sure. I mean, I think he's one of those people that, because there is a lot of Republicans that will refuse to vote and support Donald Trump. And if he is the Republican nominee, there are a lot of Republicans that will not support him, even if he makes it to general, even though a lot of Republicans preach unity, which I don't believe a lot of people actually believe in that. So I kind of view Tim Scott as one of those alternatives, like the candidates that is a great alternative candidate for someone to support other than DeSantis or Trump. So
sure,
kind of my take on Tim Scott. Yeah,
I think, one more after Nikki Haley at 3.8%. She's just awful. Her launching ad, she was talking about the Uyghur genocide, which, that's pretty much, I don't want to say been safely debunked, But I mean, there's plenty of research kind of suggesting against that. And then Adrian Zenz was the original reporter who reported on that, saying that China's committing genocide. And he eventually had to retract some of his statements because he was off by like a factor of 10 or something like that. And he's just a total classic neocon. And she was, I believe, appointed by Trump at one point. But then, now obviously it's going to be entertaining to see Trump kind of go to bat against a lot of the people that he appointed. So, Nikki Haley.
I am not the biggest fan of her.
That's what I thought.
I used to be, but I need to be honest. I feel like she quits everything that she starts. Mm-hmm. And in particular with like foreign affairs stuff, I personally disagree on that. But honestly, she just really comes across someone that doesn't have a lot of convictions and just kind of like, goes with the wind and kind of goes with the flow and goes along with what's popular. Yeah. I almost can't even really point out what exactly her stances are because I feel like it changes all the time based on what the polls say or what's important with the Republican base. So, in my opinion, I think she's running to position for herself to be in the cabinet of whoever the Republican nominee is if a Republican takes the White House. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's probably like my first like actual opinion about a candidate so far is that I'm not a huge fan of her.
Yeah, my buddy Jacob there's got a point. Who? So coming up after Nikki Haley is Mike Pence, which. It's kind of interesting. I gotta say, people are gonna run me up the flagpole for this, but the debate between him and Kamala was actually entertaining, and I thought he handled himself pretty well. But in 2023, we're not looking for necessarily somebody that's polite and is going to do things by the book. And Pence, I think, just reeks of that. And, also one of his campaign statements was, we're not sending enough arms or money to Ukraine, which, the Republican base is actually pretty good on this. So your thoughts on Mike Pence?
I think it's very, yeah, I'm laughing because I'm remembering that debate too, because I thought that was amazing. I thought he did such a great job. Like I preferred that debate over like the Trump and the Biden debate as far as entertainment wise. I was so happy with how well he did. And I actually, outside of like the Trump bribery and stuff, I don't know the guy from Adam, right? I don't know any of these people from Adam. So I want to make that clear. I don't know any of these people personally. I probably will never meet them.
Sure. Right.
But Mike Pence actually genuinely, like as a person outside of politics, he really does seem like a wholesome and good man. Mm-hmm. And that's something, regardless of like all these really cringe stances, that's something I can admire regardless of that, especially when you're someone that's involved in the political system like myself and you see things that you don't agree with and whatnot. Something like that is a huge breath of fresh air, and that's something to commend and respect. Like outside of that, like there's some conservatives who disagree with it, but his rules where how he conducts himself with his wife, I'm not gonna lie, I actually like that. Like how he doesn't take interviews, and I'm not saying like other people can take this, but the fact that he has that is really admiring because he really, I view that like if that's how he respects his family, then I think that's something, to be followed and something more people should do. Like, so people don't know, like he has this rule where he doesn't stay in the room with other females unless his wife is present. He doesn't even take interviews with other female reporters unless his wife's in the room because, he's a very devout Christian. And, one of those ways which I kind of follow and abide by, which is that, temptation kind of leads you down towards that. And I think he's someone that is incredibly self-aware about, especially in the political world where corruption is basically at its high. So he has those boundaries to protect himself in his marriage. And that's something too that I respect. I mean, genuinely outside of the Trump rivalry stuff and like the January 6th stuff or whatever, or the 2020 election or whatever, I genuinely feel like this man is protected from God because like there isn't any like huge controversial things, at least from what I'm aware of. So I think that's really interesting. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to kind of see where he shapes up. But that's kind of my take. I actually like the guy, even though, like, I have some stances I disagree with.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. Now we're getting into the two front runners. So DeSantis, Pence was at 5.8 and DeSantis at 21.1. I'll give my thoughts on DeSantis, and then I know we touched on this a little bit last time, but I'm curious if you kind of have any thoughts now. Um, in my mind, the way I see this playing out is DeSantis is really, really good at like hiring and firing people, right? I mean, he's very, very concise, and like the issues that he's good on and like well read on, he's actually good on them. Now he is like the Zionist, as in like all the money in the world is going to go to Israel, and he's bad on BDS laws where you literally can't criticize Israel in Florida, or else you could literally get arrested on some college campuses. But like when it came to his stance on COVID, it's very, very admirable, and he was very, very smart, as in like well read on that stuff, and that's impressive. But like now when he's campaigning, he has absolutely zero charisma, which is strange because like when you watch his press conferences, he was fiery, he wasn't afraid to punch back, and he was likable in his confrontations with the media. But now he seems kind of deflated, which is very, very surprising for me. So in my opinion, I see this going as if DeSantis can beat Trump in the primary, I think he'll beat Biden, just eking out a victory. But I think if Trump beats DeSantis in the primary, I think Trump's going to lose again. So I guess before we tackle the latter part of that, what are your thoughts on DeSantis?
I like the guy. I'm a fan of him. But full disclosure, I am one of those Republicans that doesn't view him as America's governor. I do have other governors that I prefer, just my personal preference.
Sure.
My personal favorite is actually Governor Glenn Youngkin from Virginia. During that 2021 cycle, I thought him winning was a huge victory and just a huge like white pill that we needed. Especially with everything going on, during that election and coming up before that 2022 election, it really gave a lot of hope. And for those people that, aren't aware with like the political aspect of it, the off years, which is like the years where there's no presidential year, it can be an indication of like the national environment, which could kind of predict of how each party can go. And so obviously the 2020 election cycle was interesting to say the least. But before all that happened, the 2021 cycle where Governor Glenn Youngkin won, and then Jason Mayaris for Attorney General, and then Winsome Sears for Lieutenant Governor, like those people winning really showed that Republicans had an opportunity for the 2020 election cycle. It showed that Republicans could potentially do well because those people did well. So in a lot of ways, Governor Youngkin's victory was just inspiring, and just as far as like how he communicates with the press and the average human being, and just from the campaign side, I have heard that from a lot of operatives and consultants that Glenn Youngkin was like the best candidate that they've ever helped and worked with. He is extremely genuine. He is the nicest person you'll ever work for, and like he's the same as like what you would imagine. Just an awesome human being. And like I said, as someone that, volunteers and works in politics too, in government, like something like that I can get behind, and I would take over like a lot of things. Trust me. I'll take good humans and decent people that work hard, that are kind to people above a lot of things, just because it's needed. So that being said, I like Ron DeSantis, but I'm definitely not one of those people that view him as America's governor. That's just my personal preference. So I definitely kind of deviate myself from a lot of Republicans in that sense. I do think he did a lot of great things as governor. I'm definitely not a DeSantis hater, but the one thing I will say that I've noticed, and why talking about the DeSantis and Trump thing is a little bit of a touchy subject for me, and and to be honest with you, a San Diego young Republican, I made the executive decision for us to not endorse anyone for the presidential primary because of how divisive this topic is.
Right.
The DeSantis and the Trump thing. And the reality is I do have a lot of members that like DeSantis and Trump. And I also have a lot of members that also like all the other candidates that we talked about. I also have a lot of statewide and local candidates where there's some Republicans running against each other. And, so for San Diego Republicans, our number one goal is membership. Our number one goal is to rebuild the club, make it relevant again. And right. I really care about kind of taking things outside like the national scene and having people focus on local politics and creating a space community where people can be able to have dialogue and conversations about the everyday issues instead of like the national partisan politics stuff. Mm-hmm. So for DeSantis, there's some things he's done that I liked a lot. And then there's some things I disagreed with. I agree with you as far as like a lot of people think personality is not a big factor important when it comes to policy or governance, but office is everything in politics. And
yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, for better or for worse. I'm not saying that has to be one reason why people should vote, but I'm talking about the everyday average person who I used to be one of those people, right, that didn't care about politics. I'm not as plugged in the bubble or whatever. I'm speaking before, not now. Yeah. But for some people, that's something that's important to them. And I agree with you. Like, if you look back at different news clips of what DeSantis has done, it's like the comms. They definitely slice the clips to make him come across as like this firebrand. And the reality is when you dive deep into his policies, like, I almost don't even know where he stands on certain issues. I mean, as far as like, again, like I'm not as tuned in with certain things as a lot of people might think, but okay, war on Disney. I don't really care about that, to be honest. I care about if like I can afford my home. I care about homelessness. I care about public safety. I care about all these different things. But like certain culture wars like that, like I don't care. I'm gonna be honest, like this is my phone. I love Star Wars. I still have Disney Plus. Like I'm sorry. I'm doing a service to conservatives and Republicans. I'm not gonna cancel my Disney Plus. If I get invited to Disneyland, I would go. And I'm sure a lot of people on the right would do that too. So that's kind of like my opinion. I have found that I'm a huge believer you're allowed to criticize Trump. You're allowed to criticize any public figure and politician and candidate. That's the whole point. You're put in the public eye and you are given, and people are given the privilege to criticize you. I have found just personally, like in a day-to-day dialogue with everyday people and political people, the second I have given pushback or disagreements or play devil's advocate with Ron DeSantis, people have flipped out. I'm just like,
wow.
I'm like, like if we're allowed to criticize Trump, I should be allowed to criticize DeSantis. And that's not, obviously that's not something like he can control, right? But it's about the vitriol, it's about the environment that in my opinion, he's kind of inevitably caused. So that's my honest opinion about DeSantis.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And the fact that he hasn't been able to give a straight answer on the Ukraine stuff looks really bad. And we're going to get on to Trump here in a second, but like, it almost seems like him and Trump are going after each other in like the worst way possible. So like DeSantis's criticisms of Trump should be, why did you fire Fauci? What the heck was this COVID response that you did? All the spending and like, you said you were going to drain the swamp, but then the swamp drained you. There should be obvious criticisms, but he's just dodging it. And then Trump's going after him for his COVID response and saying that New York did better. Like some of this stuff, it blows my mind. Buddy Jacob again. Let's see. The DeSantis campaign is dead in the water. However, if anyone could burst across the finish line in the last minute for the win, it would be him. I think I would generally agree with that. His announcement on Twitter, I don't think helped him at all. That was pretty bad. It was about as close as I could get. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, since you brought that up, I need to be completely honest. I thought that was a very cringe move. Like, I've had people, and I've had disagreements with friends about this, but
yeah.
I mean, I've had people say like, oh, because it's online, it's how everything's going. I'm like, no, like most people are not on social media actually. Mm-hmm. So if you're not on Twitter, if you're not plugged into the bubble, you're not going to know what's going on. I mean, obviously, I know like because it's a big deal, it's the presidential campaign, it's going to pick up in the news cycle, but I don't know. Like, I'm not saying I'm like this, like, I'm not like a huge, like, ceremonious and preamble person, but like, there's something to be said when you have like a legit like podium and you're just announcing you're running for president and then you're going on a Twitter spaces. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm one of the, like, maybe it's a little bit uppity to say it, right? And maybe it's not a huge hill to die on, but it's not like the biggest thing in the world to me, obviously. But since you brought it up, that's one of the things I would criticize. Like, so we're going to be announcing that you're running for the highest elected office in the country to going online on the Twitter space where there's only a certain amount of active voters on. Like, I don't know if I like that move of how like all our presidential announcements are like that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair criticism, but the only pushback I would give, and I don't know how strong this would necessarily be, is that I think he's trying to play to a younger base. And I think he's trying to go more towards where he believes they are. So, like, this is what I've praised RFK for. I believe that, like, DeSantis and Trump are both, in like, even Biden, they're running 20th century campaigns. We need more 21st century candidates who aren't talking about bringing the jobs back and, you know, the stuff that we've heard for the last 30 years that ultimately never happens. RFK seems to be a little bit more in touch with this stuff, which is really, really interesting because he's going on all these podcasts and he's still doing, like, press stuff when it's available to him. And then, you know, he had a formal announcement, like he's running a 21st century campaign. He understands the media and how it works today. DeSantis and Trump don't really seem to be able to do that the same way, but Trump's such a bombastic character that, you know, he's going to get eyes on him no matter what. So do you have anything else on DeSantis there or anything else before we move on to Trump?
No, and I appreciate you sharing your perspective on that because you made a good point. I think influencer marketing and podcasting is another alternative method of communication for the media and the press. So I never really saw it from that perspective too. But I don't know. I just announcing your presidential race on a platform that only has a certain amount of active voters. That's just.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think announcing your presidential like platform there was a horrible idea, but like ideally you would have announced it like a formal announcement, right? Like go on TV or whatever. And then you could do a Twitter space where you have selected people, which is pretty much what it was. I mean, Thomas Massey endorsed him and he was asking him a question. It's a Bush League move by DeSantis. Yeah.
And that would have been perfect too. And that that's fine. But as far as like making the initial, like I'm going to announce on Twitter, like that, I disagreed on that.
Yeah. Okay. So then our front runner, Donald Trump at 51.9. People are well aware I'm not a Trump guy at all, but I can recognize where he's doing good. When it comes to Ukraine stuff, I don't believe a word the dude says, but he's saying the right stuff. You know, he says, I want people to stop dying. I just want people to stop dying. That's what people want to hear. People want to hear we're not going to send another $100 billion over there. Now, once again, Trump faltered during his presidency and had sent weapons over there that Obama wouldn't even do when, you know, his second in command, who's now the president, was, you know, kind of in charge of the coup there. Trump faltered there, but once again, he's saying the right stuff. There was a campaign speech. I talked to Scott Horton about this. And he was like, I'm pretty sure he was going to say China, but he ended up saying it's them. He has this thing where he says, oh, it's not me. They're after you. And I'm just in their way. Once again, you don't got to believe him, but like you have to understand and realize why people resonate with this stuff because they feel personally attacked by the Washington elites. And Trump is speaking to that anger. He's great at marketing his brand. He's absolutely phenomenal at it. So that's why he's doing so well. And then, you know, he's announcing, he has these videos. Oh, we're going to take down the deep state. It's going to be slaughtered like you've never seen before. And then, you know, now with the whole media and, you know, now essentially the Biden administration going after him, it's reasonable for people to think that like he is their vengeance. People want to see blood, and Trump, I think, represents kind of the sword that's going to pull it from him.
Yeah. And you know, the biggest thing is that we need people to win elections on the Republican side is, yeah, we obviously would love to pull people from the left and change hearts and minds. That's my goal. In fact, I got the phone call with a local Democrat that's sick with his own party and he wants to check out San Diego Young Republicans. So beautiful. I'm a huge, yeah, and that's beautiful. Those are the kind of conversations I want to have with people. I want to have more of those. So obviously we need to win people from the other side. We need to win people on the middle, but I think one thing people need to also keep in mind, especially in California, I mean, we break down how many votes we need to win. We need the Republicans to vote too. Otherwise, like, there's no, you can consider your election over and you're losing. So on that hand, I think that's one strength that Donald Trump does have in general is he knows how to turn out the base in that regard. He knows what to say. He knows, how to get people fired up. And, people need to, I think people recognize that whether they like it or not. I mean, I've gone on TV multiple times and gone asked by mainstream and left-leaning networks, but they've grilled me and asked for my opinion about like the Trump arraignment and indictment and everything happened in Miami. And, I'm just kind of sitting there. I don't know like what kind of initial reactions they wanted. But I just, had no choice but to be honest. And I'm very appreciative that they reached out for my perspective and they thought it'd be unique to ask a young Republican about it. And so I'm very grateful about it. But I was just honest, like, I don't think this is like the biggest deal in the world. Like I think the average everyday American cares a lot more about the everyday issues and not national partisan politics or some like, and to be honest, like with everything that's happened with Donald Trump before, it almost like they do this like all the time and somehow he ends up walking away. And so I kind of view all these things that are going on right now as the same thing. It's a distraction from the things that everyday Americans care about.
Teflon Don, that's why they call him that. Nothing could stick to him. Yeah, I actually definitely agree with that. And I think you're going to have kind of two sects of the moderates. And I think the larger sect of the moderates is probably the people who see all this stuff going on and they're like, please just make it stop. Like whatever we could do to just make this insanity stop. I don't care anymore. The Democrats drive him nuts. And then, he gets Republicans riled up. Like, I just don't want to deal with this. I don't want to hear about it anymore. I think that's probably a large chunk of moderates. There's probably some who are probably like, well, the Democrats are so terrible. And like this stuff's annoying, but like Trump is a better alternative. And then I think a majority of the Republican base is rallying behind Trump. And then there's probably a smaller faction of the Republican base who probably feels that same annoyance and looks at DeSantis as kind of like the relief. And then, obviously there's Democrats on the other side who probably, there's probably a small minority who think, okay, well, I think Trump's reasonable. And there's probably a much, much larger faction who just can't even stand the existence of Donald Trump. What do you think? Do you think that's accurate or do you think I'm full of shit?
No, I think that's very accurate. I mean, people have asked me like, oh, can you predict on who might win the primary or the general? Because I know there's a lot of people that I understand the logic too. And I think it's important. You obviously want a Republican that can not only win the primary, but could also beat the general and make it across the finish line. So I agree with that and understand that logic. And that's why, like, I put on my presidential cap and I try to stay agnostic about it because I don't feel obligated to have a public opinion about it because I have members that are divided on this. And my goal as the president is to unify people and to bring the conversation local instead of just focusing on just the president. So, but yeah, I agree with you. I think, and what I've shared with reporters on this too, when they've asked me about endorsements and my opinions on this and that, do you think people will not, will be turned off by it? My opinion is, yeah, of course. I think a lot of people would be sick and tired of this and they have a right to believe that. I also think that there's a lot of people that are sick and tired of it, yes, but they would be inspired to get involved in their community and to be the change they wish to see in the Republican Party. I'm one of those people. I got really fed up with how things were going with the country and I decided to step up and make a difference. And that's kind of like how I view this too. Like, I think people will always have their opinions about all these presidential candidates, but I think that there are people and the people who I hoping to captivate as the president of San Diego Young Republicans is people that want to step up and be a leader as a business owner, as a political activist, as a working professional in their own right, but want to be able to network and find people with similar values. And so for me, that's way more than important than any presidential or any campaign, is having the ability to inspire and to help fulfill people's purpose and lead an organization where it could be a great platform for people. Like, you never know. You could show up to a San Diego Young Republicans event and you could meet your next best friend, or you could meet your future husband or wife. But you wouldn't have done that unless you were involved in San Diego Young Republicans. So that's kind of like my take on the whole race and Donald Trump and the 2024 presidential landscape. I think people are pretty dead set in a lot of their ways on the candidates. I think there's people that will like or dislike certain people. And, we're just going to have to see how things shake out. I will say, I think that the presidential primary on the Republican side, I think it's basically going to boil down to Donald Trump and DeSantis by far. I think that's like where like the real competition is figuring out who's going to edge out.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about this ever since, people started kind of talking about DeSantis and Trump. I seriously can't wait to watch them two brawl out. I have my friend Reed Coverdale and I talk about this all the time. Just to see them two duke it out will be absolutely hysterical. Listen here, Ron DeSanctimonious. I got you elected. Just remember the phone call. You were crying, something like that. I can hear it already. I can't wait to see the debates. So, I think
2016.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then, the chance. I don't want to see Trump and Biden debate again, because like that was just a clusterfuck. Like Trump has this thing where he's not willing to like not be in the limelight. And the thing with Biden is you just have to let him continue to hang himself, right? He's not going to let you hang him. You can do that. He can do that by himself. But if you try to do it, it's not going to work, because now he can play the victim. If he would have just let him talk, then people would have saw. But Trump was really unhinged in that first debate. So at the same time, though, he doesn't seem to quite have the same fiery passion that he did 8 years ago. Obviously, he's getting older, and I'm sure, there's probably a lot of stress. I don't know if he's going to have it like he had it in 2016, so it's going to be interesting.
No, absolutely. I do agree. It's going to be super interesting. I mean, aside from like the divisiveness, on the inside, it is exciting to say the least. And I'm really looking forward to debates. Like I said, I was never one of those people that was into the debates. But now that I've caught the bug for several years now, like I'm genuinely looking forward to it. I'm going to be hosting debate watch parties for San Diego Young Republicans.
Nice.
And I think it's going to be super fun to watch all this together.
Nice. All right. Well, I think that's a pretty good note to kind of wrap things up on. Cynthia, where can everybody find you, support you, and check out what you're doing, as well as your activism?
Sure. So thank you so much, Kyle, for having me on. So much fun talking about a lot of things, politics and other things that are important in that life outside of that. So if people want to follow me, I'm really active on all the social media platforms, mostly on Twitter and Instagram. So it's Cynthia Kaui. So you could spell it CYNTHIA. Then my last name is Kaui, Kaui. And if you are based in San Diego, California, and you are between the ages of 18 to 40, I want you to be able to check out San Diego Young Republicans. We are really growing in an expansive and increasingly exponential rate because we have been creating such a great community and space for young conservatives in the county to connect with people with similar values in the same age range. I know how intimidating it can be to make friends outside of college, and more importantly, find people with different political beliefs like you. So I want San Diego Young Republicans to be a place that you can call home. So if you want to check us out, just search up San Diego Young Republicans. We're very active on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and then you can sign to be a member. We have a link tree, so you can sign to be a member for $50 a year. And we actually have a lot of people that are supportive outside the age range that love San Diego Young Republicans and want to see us be successful. So we actually launched a silver membership for people that are over the age of 40. And that's also $50 a year. So like I said, thank you so much, Kyle, for having me on. I had so much fun and happy to be back whenever you'd like for me to be back on.
Absolutely. I have an idea for one maybe down the pipe. So we'll definitely be in contact. And yeah, if you don't got anything else, we'll close her out.
Great. Thank you.
Of course. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. This was In Liberty and Health. And until next time, take care.